Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Scott Schaefer. Coming up on tonight's program, we'll hear from California Assemblyman David Chiu about state lawmakers' latest push to make housing more affordable. Plus, we talk to French artist Sophie Calle about her new exhibit in San Francisco and her unusual connection to the Bay Area. But first, President Donald Trump Friday replaced White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus with Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. That story is still developing. Meanwhile, after nearly a week of debate on the Senate floor, the latest effort to repeal and replace Obamacare failed in the early morning hours in the Senate. 3 Republicans, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and John McCain, who was diagnosed with brain cancer last week, cast the deciding votes against the proposal. The plan would have left 15 million people without insurance and raised premiums, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Also this week, President Trump took to Twitter to announce that transgender people could no longer serve in the military. It's a dramatic reversal from just a year ago, when the Obama administration began allowing transgender troops to serve openly. Joining me now are Republican consultant Sean Walsh, San Francisco Chronicle political writer Joe Garofoli, and UC Berkeley political science professor Lisa Garcia Bedolla. Welcome to all of you. What are we possibly going to talk about today? Sean, let me begin with you. Last night, a very dramatic vote in the Senate. John McCain, coming back from a brain cancer diagnosis, casting a decisive vote against the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. Skinny, what do they call it? Skinny repeal. Right. So was that a surprise that he, of all people, cast that vote no? Or was this sort of payback to Trump for some of the things he said over the years? I mean, what was going on? What's your read there?
I think it's classic McCain. So he's been a little bit of kind of counter culture as far as the Republican Party goes. He's been doing this for now 20 years. And so he wants to work with Democrats, second his brand identification. Plus, there's 10 other Republicans, senators, that don't want this repeal and replace to happen either. So there weren't the votes there. There just weren't.
So even if he had not voted no, someone else you think might have?
I do. And the bottom line is, once you give something to someone, particularly 32 million people or 22 million people who didn't have it before, and then you say you potentially could take it away, it's bad politics, very bad politics for a number of those senators, and so they did it in their own interest.
So what does this mean? Where does this leave the Republicans' effort to repeal and replace or change or tweak? You know, Joe?
Well, when they say we're moving on, that's political speak for next. We're done here.
But it's not. Are they really done?
No, they're not done. They could come back and do it, but they've tried several different versions of it now, and it doesn't look good. They just don't have the votes for it. Now, will they come back? Is there going to be incentive for Democrats to work with them to sort of tweak the system? Because let's face it, there's a ton of stuff wrong with Obamacare. There's 3 dozen counties where there's no offering for health care. There's 1,000 where there's only one provider offering. So there's stuff to work on. I don't know if they're going to work together on it for a variety of political reasons.
Well, and Lisa, it seems like the only thing Democrats can really do is reach out and say, hey, we'd like to help fix the problems that Joe just identified and others, but are they going to really reach back, the Republicans, do you think?
Well, I think it depends on the governors, right? Because the governors are the ones that are actually really feeling the pain of these problems. And I think especially for the Republican governors that actually didn't expand Medicaid and thought that a repeal was possible, I think maybe now they're imagining we have to make this work for our state.
And
it's not enough
expand,
to just, and maybe even expand. And so I think if the governors put pressure on the Republicans, I think then the Democrats have the opportunity to really address those issues and make it work better, because it seems clear that they're not going to be able to fulfill that promise.
And Sean, the Republicans keep talking about the death spiral, which is really exaggerated in terms of Obamacare, but the president can really accelerate that if he wants to. Is that a good idea?
I don't think, actually, that healthcare in the country is in a death spiral. I think it is way too expensive, and our economy actually is humming along. Record unemployment or low employment levels, record revenues coming in. California's doing great, but California right now is at least $2 billion to maybe $4 billion upside down on health care, and if the economy slows down, it'll be devastating. You're absolutely right. This should be done by the governors. 10 governors, both 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, came out earlier this week and said, we think we should get together and do the reform. I think McConnell and the Republicans in Congress are completely playing this wrong from a PR communications perspective. They shouldn't say we're moving on. What they should say is, we've tried this here. We need to go exactly what you said, with the states, with the governors, come up with a plan and do what I've said on the show before, which is systematically undo Obamacare over a 3, 4, 5 year period so it actually works. Work with the governors, spread the political risk around, and that's the way to do it, not just saying I'm walking away.
What, this has been an issue for Republicans for 7 or 8 years now. Repeal it, they hated it, they didn't vote for it, and yet they didn't really have a workable plan to replace it with. Does that suggest perhaps that the Republicans are better in opposition than they are at governing? I mean, they ran the table in November and they can't get it done.
I mean, I think it reflects the fact that there are deep ideological fissures in the Republican Party, and so it was easy. Different Republicans hated different aspects of Obamacare. They were united in their opposition, but for different reasons. And the problem was, over the last 7 years, they haven't worked as a caucus to actually figure out how to address those problems and how to come to a middle-of-the-road sort of solution, and people weren't willing to give up. And so if you absolutely say there can't be any individual mandate, and you're saying that you have to have coverage for pre-existing conditions, those two things have to be together, right? So that's the problem, is that once you start dismantling pieces, other things fall apart. And so they didn't have those conversations, and because it was easier to just say we all hate it, and I think they paid the price in this process.
And as this is going on, the backdrop, you've got the president at war with his attorney general, Jeff Sessions, tweeting against him and suggesting he should not have recused himself. Time will tell, he says, if he's going to be around much longer, the attorney general. What kind of a signal does that send to Republicans in the Senate or anywhere else about loyalty, putting your neck out for this president and what you get back, if anything?
You hit it spot on. And by the way, this is the most dangerous that President Trump has entered into from a political perspective. So you had the senator from South Carolina come out and basically put the president on notice that Jeff Sessions is one of our guys. We like him. He's a very honorable man. And if you go after him and you after Mr. Mueller, the gloves are off with us. You will have a miserable relationship with us, and we are not going to work with you. And that is a big, big problem for the president.
Joe, what about,
and more than that, he's also starting to lose the conservative talk radio, the conservative media echo chamber. They're starting to push back on him. Rush Limbaugh, still largest audience around, says it was unseemly the way he went after Sessions. And so,
well, what about Comey too? I mean,
but Comey's not. But Sessions is beloved. Sessions is the guy he was with Trump early. He was the guy who said, "I'll help you build the wall." I mean, he took a real risk in supporting Trump early, and so and he's a favorite son and among the conservative base, and when he's pushing on Sessions, he's getting the blowback from the
base. It goes to your loyalty issue.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the first real legitimate elected member to come out and support him early.
Put that hat on.
That gave a lot of legitimacy to him. And so when you talk about loyalty, loyalty's a two-way street. It's not, I'm going to jump on the hand grenade for you, you lose your limbs, and then they wheel you out on a rickety wheelchair afterwards because you don't like one or two things you're doing. It is a big problem for the president with Republicans.
Well, and not just there, but also the whole issue of leaking.
Yes.
Part of this, there's now speculation, accusations from the new communications director, Scaramucci, that Reince Priebus is one of the big leakers. There may be, I'm sure, many people in the Justice Department, the FBI, who are also leaking. Isn't that also a reflection of the lack of loyalty?
Well, I think it's a reflection of the fact that Trump's leadership style has not translated well from business to government, right? So first of all, he likes to foster competition among his staff, right, which may be part of the reason why people leak, is you're trying to undermine the other people. That doesn't work in this context. Also, his tendency to be threatening and to try to punish people completely backfired with Lisa Murkowski, and his inability to understand the senator from Alaska, the fact that the Interior Secretary called her up to threaten her, and she has oversight over his agency, not appreciating she has a lot of power over him. And so that was very ham-handed from a Washington standpoint. And so it's not just loyalty doesn't pay, but they aren't able to carry out on their threats either. And so I think all of it just creates chaos and undermines the agenda overall.
And the president's leadership also is in question on what he did on health care and what he didn't do. No town halls, no major speech about it. And he didn't barnstorm. He didn't go to Alaska. He didn't go to Maine. He didn't go to these places. He didn't go to Arizona. I guess would have been late. But he didn't leverage his personal relationship with the base, his personal relationship with the voters to push this bill. And he was giving mixed signals.
Yeah. Well, and just transitioning to one of the other big issues this week was the transgender military personnel, which of this change in policy was announced via tweets. There was nothing else. There was nothing on paper. The Joint Chiefs were caught off guard. The Defense Secretary, I think, was on vacation when this happened. Sean, is this any way to run a railroad?
It's not. And so it's in the transition. The president has
What transition?
in the transition to this transgender issue.
Okay.
The president has a spectacularly competent cabinet. They are terrific. Maybe one of the best cabinet assembled in modern era. But his White House staff has virtually no experience running an actual White House. So I see you have an inexperienced White House staff, and what comes out of the White House and what comes out of the president is discombobulated at best. And this issue at DOD, it's not really an issue. You've had, I think, 250 people apply to undergo the transgender process, psychological counseling, surgery, et cetera, and only 150 have actually gone under it. This is a problem that was created by the president. There was no problem at all. This issue was done and over and moving on.
Well, and it really, Joe, undermines, or at least puts fear and a lot of anxiety among the active duty transgender folks. The numbers are a little unclear, but as many as maybe 16,000.
Yeah, anywhere from 5 to 16,000. And this also, number one, you don't have your commander-in-chief backing you up. You're putting your life on the line, and then the commander-in-chief says, no, you all of a sudden you can't serve at all? That's crazy. But also, it's bad decision-making by Trump, again. He did it without the facts, without the facts that are on the table. He did it without consulting the military. And he did it kind of on a whim. Almost.
And no plan.
And no plan. Yeah. Lisa, one thing he suggested, the president, was that now the Midwest Democrats in the Midwest need to own this issue. If they're going to go out and defend transgender folks in the military, go right ahead. It's your issue. In other words, suggesting that this is an elite West and East Coast issue, that it's not something that's going to play well in the middle of the country as a political matter. What do you think of that strategy?
I think it's been clear that he miscalculated, right? He was rebuked by the Joint Chief of Staff, right? The fact that people are serving honorably. It has not been an issue in the military. The military supports their personnel. People put their lives on the line for this country. And so that has not gone well. He's gotten negative feedback from Republicans who aren't in favor of this policy.
Orrin Hatch, even.
Yes. So I think he misjudged the fact that these are human beings that are in fact serving us and giving great sacrifice and doing so with honor, and to just do this in this haphazard way with no plan and no acknowledgement of all the service people in the military currently that are going to be affected, and their units and their leadership, was just irresponsible.
The Department of Justice also this week weighed in sort of unexpectedly in a case involving gay employment discrimination. These are private employers. Didn't involve the government, but the DOJ filed a brief saying that anti-discrimination laws don't apply to gay and lesbian employees. What are the politics? It's kind of reminiscent, Joe, isn't it, of 2004 when gay marriage was put on the ballot to help drive turnout in that election.
Yeah, in 11 states, and it did, and it helped. And this is also Trump breaking a campaign promise. I mean, it was really unusual when he was at the convention, and he says he reached out to LGBTQ, which is very unusual to mention the Q at a Republican convention, and he says, "I'll have your back." And he got applause. The room warmed to that. But this decision, the Justice Department, this goes against that. He's a guy in New York. He's not uptight about gay issues.
That's right.
I mean, this is him playing politics and pandering to the right, who may be leaving him.
And maybe trying to throw attention off of the Russia investigation and healthcare.
Maybe. Some people say that he's doing these kind of feints from a media perspective to do that. I just think he woke up, had a thought, and put it out.
But how horrible is that? if you're making major policy decisions based on things like that, I would just say this is the irony, though, of him going after Sessions, because it's a reflection of the fact that Sessions has actually been putting the Trump agenda forward much more effectively than Trump,
that's right.
and is being punished for it.
What's unfortunate is, with regards to the LGBT community, actually, President Trump had I think a pretty, positive record, or at least relationship there. There have been some activists who've gone after him, and they were looking for a way to hit him on it, and he just gave them a way to hit him on it. From a transgender perspective, again, no offense to most of the country, but most of the country has not seen anybody who's transgender. I mean, they're not walking down the street every day. It's a pretty small population, and the most people identify transgender with is Caitlyn Jenner, and she's a Republican. And she seems, to be normal. Yes, but what I'm saying is, actually, that's a pretty positive role model to be introduced to most of the country from a transgender perspective. Yeah. So there's not this hue and cry that this is some problem.
Joe, real quick, we're short on time. How does all this transition, so to speak, into 2018 and the elections?
Well, the Democrats hope that they can make hay out of this in the 7 districts in California where Hillary won, Republican districts where Hillary represented by a Republican and Hillary won. It's going to be really tough. They might get one, maybe one. All right,
America's favorite reality show. Thank you all very much, Lisa Garcia Bedolla, Joe Garofoli, Sean Walsh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Skyrocketing rents and housing prices are no longer confined to the Bay Area or Los Angeles. Throughout the state, homes aren't being built fast enough, especially for middle and lower income residents. But now Governor Jerry Brown and state lawmakers are pledging to do something about it with new legislation. Among other things, they hope to streamline and spur the construction of housing projects. Here now to talk about the state's affordable housing crisis is California Assemblymember David Chiu. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show.
This has been a big priority for you since you've been in Sacramento. Give us a sense of, first of all, the magnitude of the problem and why it's so important for the state to do something about it.
Sure. When I first went to the legislature a few years ago, San Francisco was experiencing the most intense housing crisis we've seen. But in the last couple of years, we have in the Bay Area has really become the epicenter for a statewide crisis. And Californians from the San Diego border all the way up to Oregon, from the Pacific Ocean all the way inland are truly suffering. We have the highest rents, the highest home prices in the country, very high eviction rates. 1.7 million Californians don't lack access to affordable housing. And while we are the 6th largest economy in the world, we have the highest poverty rate in the country when you include housing costs.
When you look at the magnitude, I think the legislative analyst said it would take, I don't know, $200 billion or something to build enough affordable housing. We're looking, in Sacramento, you're looking at a $3 billion bond measure. So is this something you can really solve, or are you really just nibbling around the edges?
I think everyone appreciates there is no silver bullet to the housing crisis, and there are a number of things that we need to do. Part of it, though, is we do need to invest. We need to fund more. We lost almost $2 billion a year that we used to invest in affordable housing before the Great Recession, when redevelopment agencies were eliminated and housing bond monies dried up. And this is why part of the solution has to be a significant investment in how we build affordable housing. But we also know that we have to streamline the creation of housing as well. There was a recent report that showed that we are not building about 100,000 units a year that we need to keep up with population and demand.
You're authoring several bills, including AB 73, which cleared the Assembly. It's now in the Senate, and it would give cities and counties some financial incentives to build more housing. Given that there's a crisis, why is there so much reluctance to build housing?
There's been a lot of opposition to different ideas on how we address the housing crisis, and the fact of the matter is California is in the most intense housing crisis we've experienced in our history. But for years, different proposals to streamline housing, to fund housing, to make cities more accountable to dealing with housing have been stymied by different stakeholders who I think have been more focused on short-term interests as opposed to long-term, what's good for the state in the long term.
Well, and last year the governor, I think, put $400 million on the table for affordable housing and said you can have it if you can streamline CEQA, the environmental regulations, to help streamline the permitting process. It didn't happen. I know you wanted more than $400 million, but the opposition came from labor and from environmentalists because they didn't want that streamlining to happen. They want unionized labor to work on the housing. So how do you get around those kinds of problems?
Last year, the governor had put, late in the legislative process, a buy right proposal that was viewed as a fairly blunt tool.
Just explain what that is.
So buy right says that if you are a housing developer and your proposal meets the zoning requirements of the city, your proposal can essentially get streamlined through the process and you don't have to go through typical public approval processes to see your project built. It was a fairly blunt tool. It didn't allow for very much affordable housing to be built. It did not allow for the folks who actually built the projects to be able to afford to live in their communities. The environmental community was upset because it overrode a number of environmental protections. The streamlining proposals this year, though, have really tried to address those concerns to ensure that we are making it easier to build housing faster, but also take into account all those different factors.
This is not an issue that the governor is especially passionate about. He did issue a statement after the cap and trade vote a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago now. Why has it been so hard, or what's it been like to reel him in and make this the kind of priority that environmental issues have been for him?
It's taken a couple of years to get the governor, I think, to focus on this, and I am very grateful that this past week we did have big news from Sacramento when Governor Brown, as well as the top leadership from both the Senate and the Assembly, came together in a statement saying they were prepared to not only support a comprehensive housing package, but move it forward in the next couple of weeks. The governor has been thinking about this issue, I know, for a number of years, and he had vetoed a number of key bills that we had in prior years, including a couple of bills that I had.
Well, and he also pushed eliminating the redevelopment agency.
He had also pushed to eliminate redevelopment, which really created a huge hole in funding that had been used to build a ton of affordable housing around the state.
Is it that he just sort of fundamentally doesn't think this is a problem government can solve?
He has said elements to that effect, that the market needs to address that, and that is why he's been so focused on how we streamline housing creation. From my perspective, I think streamlining needs to be part of the equation, but the market is never going to be able to build housing at the lowest ends of the spectrum, and we need housing at every level of affordability to make this work.
Given that this is no longer just a Bay Area, Los Angeles problem, you're seeing some of the fastest rising rents in Sacramento, and as people move into the Inland Empire and the Central Valley, places like Tracy, Modesto, does that change the politics of it?
Absolutely. My committee, the Housing Committee, has done hearings all over the state, and it's been remarkable the stories that we have heard from farm workers in the Inland Empire to homeless veterans in San Diego to college students. The newest face of homelessness at this moment are college students who are sleeping on their friends' couches, in their cars, taking showers at the gym because they don't have access to housing as well.
Is this an issue you can get some Republican votes for?
We've been working on it. It remains to be seen. There have been plenty of overtures and a lot of discussion of how we can build a big tent around this, and we'll see what happens in a couple weeks.
So the legislature comes back into session, I think, August 21st, and it's going to be a sprint to the finish. I know this is a priority for you. What's the biggest challenge you're going to need to get this over the finish line?
Well, we are putting together a significant package of bills that would, for the first time, really make a serious investment in funding, streamline housing, as well as hold cities and counties that haven't been building housing more accountable. And all of those aspects are important for us to do this. I think the challenge is we have a 2/3 vote that we need to pass funding, so we're going to need a supermajority of legislators to support this. My hope, and I'm cautiously optimistic we can get there, but we will see.
All right, Assemblyman David Chiu, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Turning now to the arts. The Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture is hosting a major exhibition by a French artist with an unusual connection to the Bay Area. Sophie Calle is a conceptual artist who got her start in California. Many of her works explore themes of disappearance and loss. Recently, Calle made the unusual move of buying herself a grave plot in the sleepy town of Bolinas, California. KQED's senior arts editor, Chloe Veltman, caught up with the artist among the gravestones.
So, show me where your grave is.
It's T74.
Okay.
Which is, it starts here and ends here.
Sophie, you're from France, so what made you acquire a burial plot in Bolinas, California?
I lived here for 6 months maybe, and I started to make photos because I rented the house of a photographer from Bolinas, and she had a little dark room, so I started to use a dark room, and I came in the graveyard because I like graveyards. So my first photos that became my first work ever happened here in this graveyard. In a way, the beginning of my professional life. So I thought that it was a good enough reason to end my life that has been professional since that beginning, to end it here.
Why are you so interested in death, Sophie?
I don't know. You know, it's not death. I'm interested by subjects which are about absence, missing, a man that goes, somebody that dies, a sculpture that's taken away, and what's left. When things go well, you don't take photos of your own happiness, in a way. Once in my life where I thought I had never been as unhappy, I took a photo of the spot where I was. It was for a work called Exquisite Pain, and I took the photo. And then I spoke with the philosopher, sociologue Jean Baudrillard, and he said, well, actually, you didn't suffer that much because you thought about taking the photo of where you were suffering. So you already put a distance between that suffering and you.
There's the project Take Care of Yourself, which is also dealing with loss, and it's also featured in this show at Fort Mason in San Francisco,
Yeah.
where you have more than 100 women. 107 women who are analysing a letter to do with the breakup you had with your lover and interpreting it. So again, like you're sort of taking a step back from your pain.
Yeah.
So are you creating art as a form of therapy?
I do it for artistic reason. I do it because I want to put works on art on walls or in the page of the book. After, there is a therapeutic gift, cherry.
In your show at Fort Mason, there's this piece called Rachel Monique, and it's where you document the final moments of your mother's life.
Yeah.
What inspired you to create this project?
I was told that when people die, they use the minute you step out of the room to get something, and that's when they have their last breath. And me, I was obsessed, maybe, as I say, the last grave, the last breath, the last time of anything. And I wanted to be there when she would just have the last breath. And I was also afraid she would have something to tell me that she would not tell me directly. So I decided to put a camera. But I did this because it was her. My mother, she wanted to be always on stage, the main character. So she understood when I put the camera, she may become the main character on her death.
So do you think your mother would be happy with the result?
I am sure I would not have done it otherwise.
You clearly love cemeteries, Sophie, and recently you did a project at the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, where people came and sat with you and told you their secrets.
The project I did where people told me their secrets and we put them in a grave, at the end the Greenwood Cemetery offered me the grave. So at that point, I have 2 graves in America and none in France. I have one in Brooklyn, beautiful spot. And I have one in Bolinas, quite different. So my after life is being taken care in America much better than in France.
Sophie Calle's exhibition is on view at the Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture in San Francisco through August 20th. Entry is free. And that does it for us. You can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Scott Schaefer. Thanks so much for joining us.